All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for spending your Sunday evening with the film festival. My name is Trey Shields. I'm the senior programmer of the festival, as well as the Philadelphia Film Society. And I'm so excited to be part of this final Q&A of the entire film festival. So thank you so much for sticking with us throughout this odd and weird times. Hopefully you saw some new films that you truly love. And hopefully one of those is from our special guest that I have here with us tonight, director Braden King of The Evening Hour.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks for being here. Thanks for everyone that watched the film.
Ooh. So as per usual, feel free to submit any questions at any time. I'll work those in, but also as per usual, I got plenty of my own. So I want to start with The Evening Hour. The first thing of interest to me is that, it's an adaptation of a book that I believe came out 2012-ish.
All right. Yep.
Of the same name. Had you read this novel prior to coming onto the project or being approached with the script?
Well, what the story there is not crazily atypical. There was a producer named Tom Scapars who initially sent me the book, and was someone who was very heavily involved in the development of the project. And it was at a time I had just finished my previous film, which was a kind of a road movie romance called Here that starred Ben Foster and a European actress named Lubna Azabal, and was actively like writing and reading and looking for the next thing. And I think I got to about like page 9 or 12 in the book and sort of felt this like quiet, like I think I'm hooked into this thing. And what really appealed to me about it had to do with a combination of Carter's like really exquisite rendering of this landscape and community, and sort of a portrait of rural America that felt at once completely authentic, but something I'd never seen before, in terms of the character and how it was drawn. And I think that those things, like I'm sort of always drawn to these places and stories that take place in communities, locations, geographies that I haven't necessarily seen represented on screen extensively. And even though there's a long history of sort of films set in Appalachia, I felt like this story had something very different to it in terms of how it rendered that part of our country and that part of the world and the people who inhabited it. And so as I got deeper and deeper into it, I think I finished the book in a day or something, and was just like, okay, there was this very quiet, calm feeling of like, this is the next thing I'm going to do. And then another probably 4 to 6 years of making the movies.
Now, with the opioid crisis not being a recent thing, but it's consistently in the headlines, did you try to make this film like timeless? Because it doesn't really seem like stuck in a certain moment. Is it just kind of now?
So in a lot of ways, I'm really happy to hear you say that. This hasn't come up in a lot of Q&As, but to a certain extent, it's something I've done in every film I've made. There was an effort to kind of despecify time and even to a certain extent place. I mean, it's a very Appalachian film, but I didn't want it to be, we shot in and around Harlan, Kentucky. And one thing that I felt just in my gut from the very beginning was that I didn't want people to watch this film and be like, okay, this is a portrait of Harlan. This is what this place is like now. There is like, it's small, and there is an element of kind of once upon a time going on though too. I mean, I wanted to retain the sort of the novelistic feeling of my original experience reading the book. And so that despecification that you're talking about, even in terms of time period, even extends into some of the transitions in time, the way time passes within the film itself. Like one of the things that Joseph Kring's like primary editor and I worked a lot on was trying to move the audience through the film in a kind of musical way, where sometimes you don't know if it's been a day or 2 weeks or a month since Cole last saw this person, but to try to do it in a way that still felt seamless and kind of the way that life seems to work. And a lot of that was tied to this idea of trying to mimic, as I said, like sort of my first experience of reading the book and what that was like, and to sort of do something that was a portrait of a region without sort of claiming to be like, this is how it is, if that makes sense. There's also, having said that, there is kind of an element to Appalachia where there's sort of it's almost a joke, but that it's always 5 years behind, and in some ways when we did have conversations about, either with my department heads or wardrobe people or the production designers, well, like, when is this? um I wanted it to be contemporary, but I didn't want it to necessarily feel it, I'm gratified to hear that it kind of felt like any time, or that at least in a way that wasn't frustrating, that you didn't quite know exactly when it was, but it might not be like yesterday.
Yeah.
It may have taken place anytime within the last decade or so, was sort of the running idea that I wanted to work with.
Yeah, and I feel like it really works, especially, anyone who watches a lot of movies, you start to see like, romantic subplots happening. But I feel
Mm.
like a lot of times with Cole and Charlotte, and I believe Lacey is the other name,
Yes, that's right, Carrie
there is
Boucher,
this
yeah.
kind of like break in time, and you are left wondering how long, when was the last time they saw each other? Um, what's the conflict there? But I think it's so refreshing and also confident to just kind of be like, no, this is how it is.
This is
People
how it is,
people
and
just
like, I
latch into
mean,
each other.
you're so specifically with some of those friendships and romantic relationships, you're also touching on something that we worked on quite a bit, but with the actors and in the script, which was kind of rendering, um I don't know what's the right terminology to use, like, kind of, we all have, I think one thing that we worked on in many different facets of the film was trying to break the boxes. Like, I think we all have relationships that aren't wholly romantic, or aren't wholly friend based, or aren't, there's like gray areas in a lot of this stuff. And kind of unspecified degrees of intimacy are things that we all, I think, experience in our lives, and something we kind of wanted to bring to the film. And that's, it's, some of it happens among the male characters, some of it happens among the female characters. It's just like, how do we more accurately reflect the kind of like spectrum of intimacy and relationships that we all have with different people in our lives? Is something that we thought about quite a bit.
Yeah, and I feel like the whole film has this real kind of soulful, intimate feel to it. And probably the most intimate scene is the campfire scene, um,
Mm.
you know, between Terry and Cole. And I mean, that's probably some of the most dialogue heavy moments too in the entire film. But how do you express intimacy in these ways when trying to break out of the box without dialogue?
Well, I mean, a lot of the credit for that goes to Phil Ettinger and Cosmo Jarvis, the two actors there. And it also, traces back to earlier scenes and conversations of them. Even in the bar, there's that scene when they're kind of closing down the bar that I think tees up a lot of what happens in the campfire later, actually. And a lot of it happens in the space between the words. That was something we paid a lot of attention to, both on set but also in the editing process. I mean, there's, if you really break it down, the film does some unusual things in terms of shot reverses and things like that. It doesn't always flip around when another film might. The cuts aren't based on who's saying what when at all. A lot of it is sort of how people are receiving the person that they might be having a conversation with. Specifically in the case of Cole and Terry, and in that campfire scene, I mean, what you're kind of witnessing is Cole sort of fighting, at some point, in some way, however you want to read that, there was a point in time in which Terry had really broken Cole's heart, and you're sort of witnessing someone who's fighting against that heartbreak and this attempt at kind of reseduction, and not, partially succeeding, not totally succeeding. And we left it very open in terms of how real, not real, metaphorical, intimate that scene is. A lot of what's going on throughout the movie is, and this is beyond the scope of this question, is kind of an examination of male intimacy and friendship. And what, again, it goes back to that spectrum, like, what are the shades of that and how does that work? But to what you're saying about so much of, often, we were very particular about the words in the script when I was working with Elizabeth and we were doing the adaptation. However, but I also do think of that as like, sometimes you have to back up and almost think of it as another sound element or something, and trick yourself into realizing that, like, what the things that are unsaid in the performance are always way more important.
Yeah. And just going back to capturing not necessarily a specific town, but you said you've never been there before, like you've never been to a town like this before. You were taken away when you read the book. Did you have to entrench yourself into a specific town to capture like dialect and
Yeah, I mean,
culture?
what I was saying was that I hadn't really seen a rendering of that region like this before. I mean, we've all kind of seen you know, there's examples of Hollywood Appalachian movies. There's a big one right now, just opened on Netflix, or is about to go on Netflix. Um, I felt like it was a more nuanced and complicated portrait of the region that sort of matched actually my experiences there more than anything I'd seen. But to really answer your question, like, yeah, I come from a photography, music, and almost like nonfiction anthropological background. And so I did spend a lot of time driving around southeastern Kentucky and western and southern West Virginia, both very early and like pre-location scouting almost, just to try to figure out the geography we were going to set this in. The book is set in a fictional town in West Virginia that doesn't is sort of a composite of different research that Carter had done and places he had visited. Um, but our collaboration with the community was we couldn't have made the film without it. And so sort of looking for a hospitable home and collaborators in a community that felt at least reasonably open to us and willing to collaborate, and then really listening and working with the people we encountered was a massive part of being able to make the film we made. And other people, there's a funny thing. I was just talking with a DP friend of mine about this the other day. There were conversations about like, oh, we could shoot outside of Atlanta and sort of shoot that for Appalachia, or we could, maybe not be in a place that was 3.5 hours from the nearest airport and very difficult to get in and out of. But the issue I have with that, which as a filmmaker, is that it kind of indicates to me it's like the wrong end of the telescope. Like it indicates a very narrative centric approach to filmmaking. It conveys an approach that is solely based around conveying information, conveying narrative. Oh, we can stand this in for that. We can use this X for Y. We can, these are what the people are saying. As long as it kind of looks right, it's going to work out because we're telling this like story. But if you're interested in like sort of true experience, landscape, I don't know, it's like I seem to be drawn to some kind of ideas like film as expedition or film as cartography. And so a lot of like what's happening in the background of those frames is just as important to me as what's happening in the foreground. And I don't know how, I don't think you can make the kind of film we made if you've got such a focus on like information conveyance and narrative. And the location has always been critical to me. And so spending that time not only driving around on my own, little off and on for weeks, even going back to like 2 years out from when we shot, so that I could kind of learn the literal lay of the land and meet some people and kind of understand what the actual ground truth is like, I don't know how to make films any other way. And I certainly don't know how to like drop into a place like that and make them with any respect for the people and communities that we're encountering.
Yeah. So I feel like we've been around the bush a little bit. Like, so we have the character set up, the setting, but a big part of the film is the tone. And I feel like a lot of it, it's easy to say like lyrical is something when you have silent moments with landscapes, but I think it is appropriate at times, and it's interesting that you have this music background. And I think the first shot of like the landscape of the mountains and an explosion in the distance really sets the tone for the entire movie, and that's kind of embodies what's happening with these characters.
Yeah, yeah.
And did you find it like difficult? Because you're adapting, and I know Elizabeth did the screenplay, but you're adapting a novel with a number of characters, number of relationships. Was it difficult to balance their kind of plot developments with
Oh
your
yeah,
with the
it
more
was the
calmer
hardest
artistic
thing.
sense? Because it seems like a lot's going on in the
There's a lot going on, and we
yeah.
pared it down quite a bit from what's going on in the book. Um, you know, some might argue not quite enough, but like, that was absolutely the hardest thing. It was the hardest thing from a production standpoint. There's a deceptively large number of locations and characters, and just trying to shoot all that was
Yeah.
very, very difficult within the schedule that we had. And then in the editing room, it was very difficult as well to sort of balance all that out and figure out how to place it, as I said, in that kind of musical way that we were striving for. I mean, one of the most gratifying moments happened at the premiere at Sundance. The very first question was a woman who stood up and said, you know, I feel like I've been listening to like one of my favorite country western records for 2 hours. You know, this just feels like a record album. And I thought like, okay, cool, we can all go to the bar now. We did what we were trying to do. But yeah, trying to weave all those stories together in a way that, I mean, I talk about this all the time. It kind of felt like songs. Was that it was? We put a lot of work into that.
Now, did you have any of your own music in the film?
Uh, like that I
Yeah.
played or wrote or something. I don't in this one. I
Okay.
mean, I'm very heavily involved in the Mike Krasner, who's the primary composer, and then Tim Ratilli is probably best known for being in the band Caliphone.
Okay.
Co sort of co composed doesn't really reflect exactly how we all work together, but let's call them co-composers for the score part of it. And then Chris Swanson, who founded Secretly Canadian Records, was the music supervisor on the on the source tracks. But I worked very tightly with all those guys from like even the pre-script stage. And so sort of talking about ideas, talking about different idioms, researching music, we try out all different kinds of things. And I try to get involved with it that early so that it can actually have an influence on what we're doing during the shooting and the editing. And I've been fortunate that because we have developed this working method and that I've worked with, Michael scored some of my very first student films almost 25 years ago or something. So we have got a very long working relationship together, and being able to allow that to influence everything is a great gift. And also being able to, like, I've never had to edit with temp score. You know, like we're able to try out all these different recordings and kind of rough things. And then once we kind of place all that stuff as we're cutting the movie, we'll go back and either re-record or overdub onto or re-edit things that kind of he's come up with to finalize it all.
So when you're in the editing bay, like you said, there's a lot of parts of the novel. There's tons of different moving pieces. Were there parts of the novel that you really wanted to be in the movie and maybe even shot, but it just didn't work? Is there like an orphan scene?
Well, there's always scenes that end up on the cutting room
Yeah.
floor, sure. And in this case, you know, you were asking about balancing different story elements and stuff. What you start to realize is it's an odd thing because what I find is that you end up with scenes that are sort of, you'd think you would see this coming in the script, but for some reason it changes once you shoot them. And I guess what I'm getting at is certain it's not even plot points, but it's like
Is it just feelings, like like?
it's like feelings or emotions that get doubled up. It's
Yeah.
like you suddenly realize like, oh wait, there's two scenes that are accomplishing the same thing.
Yeah.
And so one of them has to go. You know, just it's like anytime you're repeating information, even if it's emotional information, you know, you got to have a pretty good reason for it. And so um I can't think of what exactly they are off the top of my head. I know there's one confrontation between Cole and Terry that happens at Terry's work that we went to actually great lengths to shoot and find a superstore that would let us shoot in there and that kind of thing. That just felt redundant with other things that you kind of see and feel in the film before that. And then, you know, various other moments that I'm sure I could rattle off if I thought about it for a few minutes. But that's that's every movie. You know, you end up with cutting off arms and legs and fingers and
So speaking of a little bit of graphic imagery, so living in Philadelphia, the opioid crisis, even though we're an urban setting, it's very prominent here.
Mhm.
And so I found surprising just knowing like kind of the log line. I didn't want to read anything whenever I watch any movie. You know, I just kind of go in. There wasn't a lot of, I would say, just shots of like ODing that you would normally associate with a film like this. Was that very intentional, and how come?
Well, I mean, the ramifications of what Cole is doing sort of get increasingly problematic as the film progresses. I guess let's put it that way. There's an element of survival and kind of spoiled Eden that were quite thematic in what we were trying to do, and sort of also balancing Cole's self-image as like almost a quasi like Robin Hood type character until he kind of realizes that that's not truly the case, and that what he's doing actually has a lot of negative effects. Um, and I'm not sure. I guess one other place I go is like I'm not actually sure that that's exactly what the film's about. I mean, it's sort of the in a way it's the background for everything else that's going on, and sort of part of the way Cole and some of these other characters are surviving is by reselling these drugs and what he's doing in the movie. But it wasn't sort of first and foremost. I guess I would kind of argue that maybe we need to revisit the log line, but it's not first and foremost an opioid movie in a lot of ways. It's a movie about sort of community, family, survival, in rural America today. And that happens to be one element of it, but it's not the whole thing.
Well, and it's a great element of surprise because I feel like just once again, watching a lot of movies, you start to associate certain things with certain imagery, and then it's refreshing and like special to not see that.
Right. There's also a kind of funny, anyway, this is a digression, but I've noticed a very intriguing meta thing happening with this film where, because it doesn't present the same kind of mediated portrait of the region that we're used to, there's been some interesting questions about authenticity from people that have only seen movies about the region. It's like a very odd meta, like folding back in on itself. It's been kind of a fascinating process to step back and kind of watch and ask questions about for us. Thankfully, the community seems very happy with the film. So
yeah, I mean, you're very proven. You've done the work. You put in the time.
Yeah.
And it's really just the expectations on the viewer then. At that point.
Like or like there's been some really odd comments along the way where one of those, like one of the things that happens at festivals like Sundance is you get all these like instant reviews, and then sometimes people go back and revisit, and some of that's happened, which has been great. But like one of the ones that really was puzzling to me was like, oh, these people, some of these people, it wasn't even the whole movie. It was sort of like, well, some of these people are too good looking to be this poor and into drugs and stuff. And it's like, I don't know if you really meant to say that out loud, like, I don't know like, what your idea about rural America is. But.
Well, and I feel like the classic story of Hollywood is it's always rural American actors moving to LA.
Right.
Oh, yeah, it's like corn fed, and that's
yeah. And then the other funny thing is like some of the people that are talking about are actually from Harlan, so it was just kind of a whole funny. There's been a lot of interesting kind of moments like that as we've taken the film out.
Yeah. I kind of want to know, I ask this every once in a while, is there something that's never been touched upon in a Q&A in any of these settings that like you're surprised or disappointed and you really just want to like share?
I guess I will say that one thing that has been interesting to me is that we kind of touched on the intimacy between Cole and Terry and throughout the film. And the kind of line of heartbreak that I see so clearly in Phil's, performance, and that has actually, this answer is wrong to your question, because it has been something that has come up in Q&As. Like people have asked about like, well, what was going on with them at the campfire exactly, or like what is their past, or people are intrigued by that, and like audiences seem to key into that in a way that was like pretty consistent at the festivals that I've been to and some of the Q&As we've done, like this one and that kind of thing. What's been very curious to me is that we've been fortunate to have generally positive reviews. No one has mentioned that element of the story of sort of like the film in print, which has kind of been a little bit of a chin scratcher for me. Even like very insightful positive reviews and things like that. So I guess that's a little curious.
Yeah, I guess I could only see it being, because it is kind of a reveal of the character moment. It's a big character.
Maybe or I was sort of chalking it up to a fear of being wrong. I'm not exactly sure like what the dynamic is there, but I have a lot of pride, and I mentioned this earlier, in the way that the film kind of examines these different shades of male intimacy, and part of me is yearning for someone to kind of take that on.
Well, it makes sense, yeah, because immediately I jumped to, they must have had a past, and it has to be physical relation. You just like, you have to compartmentalize what it is that you're rather than talking about like, the fluid spectrum of it,
Right, right, right.
you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that's such a cool, like, strong theme. I didn't like personally take away the first time I saw the film. So
Yeah, I mean,
it's like,
in
and it's a
fairness, we played it very, very subtly, but
yeah, and
you
it's a
know,
huge through
it's
line that
there.
once you
Yeah, yeah. Once you grasp onto it,
yeah.
I mean, Carter's out about this. Carter was actually transitioning when he wrote the book,
Okay.
and so in a lot of ways, I think, and I don't mean to put words in his mouth. We've discussed this. He's actually written essays about it. I think there was a certain element of learning what it meant to be a man at play when he was writing the book. And some of these themes we're talking about are much more overt in the book than they are in the movie. Part of the reason why they were played so subtly is that, like the opioid question you mentioned earlier, um, I had a gut sense that if we made those thematics more overt, it would turn into the only thing the movie was about. And I was very interested in the spectrum we keep talking about, both like in every way, in terms of like, these are the different kinds of people within this region. This is this landscape. This is how beautiful it is. I mean, we haven't really gotten into this, but there's a lot of movies made in Appalachia that are shot in the winter when there's no leaves on the trees, that are incredibly bleak, and showing the beauty of that place was something that was critical to us as well. You mentioned that explosion in that opening shot over that fall foliage, and we joked a lot. I was joking a lot in the editing room, like the whole movie's kind of in that first like minute and 30-second pan. That's the whole story. Here's the spoiled Eden, and then you still have 150 minutes of movie to go.
Yeah. That should be the log line,
Yeah,
first
yeah,
minute and a half.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we don't want people getting up quite yet. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, before we get out of here, so you've had quite a festival experience. You're pretty much at the end of the season, but who knows with the current state of the world? Because
Sure,
usually
yeah.
films like are about a year on the circuit.
Hmm.
So what's the future of the film that you can share with us?
Well, the film is going to be released in 2021. There'll be an announcement on that pretty soon here. I think after we get through the election news and all that. But it has been an odd year of almost. It feels tectonic compared to other experiences that I've had, and these kind of disembodied uh, uh, festival experiences are very strange. Like I'm happy the film's getting out there. I miss the social aspects of that a lot. Going back to January, February, the expectation was that I'd be on the road quite a bit this year, and that turned out to not be the case. But on the other hand, it does seem like the film's getting out there. I'm excited about the different ways some of these festivals are dealing with things, and hopeful that if we can get the pandemic under a little more control and that kind of thing, we might actually be able to hit some theaters in the spring when the movie comes out. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Braden, for joining us tonight.
Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the film being with you guys, and congratulations on, I guess, finishing your festival, right?
Yeah, we pushed it back a day because of the last election or the debate. So we have one final day of tomorrow, but it's
Oh, okay, got it.
kind of like availability of the virtual elements.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, no
Great
problem.
to be part of it, and congratulations on persevering in a very difficult year.
You too. And
All right.
thanks everyone for watching, and be sure to tell everyone about the evening hour.
Yeah, take care.